Pentagon, the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld declared war, not on foreign terrorists.
The adversary is closer to home. It's the Pentagon bureaucracy.
He said money wasted by the military poses a serious threat.
In fact, it could be said that it's a matter of life and death.
Rumsfeld promised change, but the next day, the world changed. And in the rush to fund the war on terrorism, the war on waste seems to have been forgotten.
My '03 budget calls for more than $48 billion in new defense spending.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America. To understand how the Pentagon can lose track of trillions, consider the case of one military accountant who tried to find out what happened to a mere $300 million.
We know it's gone, but we don't know what they spent it on.
Jim Minery, a former Marine turned whistleblower, is risking his job by speaking out for the first time about the millions he noticed were missing from one defense agency's balance sheets. Minery tried to follow the money trail, even crisscrossing the country looking for records.
The director looked at me and he says, "Why do you care about this stuff?" It took me aback, you know. My supervisor asked me why I care about doing a good job. So
he was reassigned and says officials then covered up the problem by just writing it off.
They got to cover it up. That's where the corruption comes in. They've got to cover up the fact that they can't do the job.
The Pentagon's Inspector General partially substantiated several of Minery's allegations, but could not prove officials tried to manipulate the financial statements. 20 years ago, Pentagon employee Franklin C. Spinney made headlines exposing what he calls the accounting games. He's still there, and although he does not speak for the Pentagon, he believes the problem has gotten worse.
Those numbers are pie in the sky. The books are cooked routinely year after year after year.
Retired Vice Admiral Jack Shanahan commanded the Navy's Second Fleet the first time Donald Rumsfeld served as Defense Secretary.
With good financial oversight, we could find $48 billion in loose change in that building without having to hit the taxpayers.
In the 2.5 minutes since this report began, the Pentagon has spent nearly $2 million, and it may never know where 25% of those tax dollars went. In Los Angeles, I'm Vince Gonzalez for Eye on America.
As soon as we got out of the train station, people were screaming and crying and yelling, and it was just total chaos, and the bottom of our building was blown out.
Down Broadway. I was standing at the corner of Fulton and Broadway. I ran into a building, ran between a column and a building at 195 Broadway, and pushed my face and my body into that building. For what seemed like 5 minutes, I was pelted with all kinds of debris. I crouched down, was coughing, trying to breathe. You couldn't get any air. The air was so full of smoke and dust. At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble and more smoke and more dust. I ran inside the buildings, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last. The streets of the financial district covered with debris, in some cases ankle deep. Cars on fire, cars just turned by the force of the explosions. It was like something no one had ever seen.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Ann Thompson. But let me ask you, after you finally emerged from that building, what about other people who could not get into a building? What kind of casualties did you see?
Tom, I will tell you that when I walked out of the building on Broadway and headed down towards Canal, it was as if there had been a blizzard of debris and dust all over the street. I saw people running, I was walking, there were a lot of rescue people there, but there were people injured. I saw a woman being carried by two men. It was like something I had never seen anything like it, and all I could think of was just to get away from there, to get to safety. And as I kept walking to Canal Street, I could hear yet another explosion behind me. It was truly one of the most frightening moments I've ever lived through.
He's Ron Insana, who went down with a cameraman hoping to get close to the World Trade Center, and then it began to come down. The first one. Ron, take us through what you experienced.
Well, Tom, much of the area had been, in fact, cordoned off, and the cameraman from MSNBC and I were trying to get across to the west side of the World Trade Center in order to hook up with the rest of the NBC crews that we knew were there. As we were moving towards the building, we saw the top begin to blow out in a plume of smoke, and we heard the noise associated with an implosion. We turned and immediately ran for cover in the other direction as debris began to rain down.
The full impact was seen in the moment in time. My colleague Stephen Evans, who was in the Trade Center and was interviewed just after the first explosion.
There was another big explosion in the other tower. Flames coming out in this billowing grey smoke. People still not panicking. People not quite understanding what was going on. Then somebody said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, I don't know, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that. The thing that strikes me is, one, the terribleness of the incident, whatever the cause, and we don't go into the politics, but whatever the cause, the terribleness, the hugeness of what's happened. So huge, in fact, that most of the people around simply can't understand what happened. People were just standing around, talking to each other, nodding their heads. Oh my God. We gotta go. We gotta go. We gotta go. Oh my God.
Your story is important. What happened?
Well, I guess it was a little before 9. I was in another employee's office when I heard an explosion, and then the building started to shake, and I thought, oh, here I go again, because I was there in 1993 as well, when the bomb went off. So I went around, started back to my section.
Which tower were you in, 1 or 2?
I was in 1, and when
I think it's pretty logical to assume that Mr. Jackson was hearing Flight 11 crash into the North Tower at 8:46. But let's see what else he has to say.
What did you do when you got out of the building?
Well, I went out into the street, and I looked back after I got past Church Street to see what had happened, and I saw that both of the buildings were on fire. And with that, I just, moved as far north as I could away from there. And I was about 4 or 5 blocks away when all of a sudden the street shook, and I heard like an explosion. I thought, oh my God, I said, the bomb just went off. And I turned around and looked back, and I saw all of this soot and smoke, and everyone just started running then.
Which tower were you in, 1 or 2?
I was in 1, and when I saw that was when Tower 2 collapsed.
The South Tower, the first to go, and the North Tower after that.